Good morning, Uplift Church. When PJ asked me to come and pray about giving this message, I was a little nervous. I've only done this once before, and so the first thing I asked him was, well, what's your series on? And he said, well, where you lead, I will follow. And that made me start thinking about, some places that God has led me in my life, I've never expected. Places that I just never thought I might end up. And if you followed me at all on Facebook, then you probably read somewhere around November. It was about, I think, 2 days before Thanksgiving. And we just finished school. They let out at 1 o'clock. And then that evening, my middle child starts. I need to go hunting. Hunting season apparently is a short number of weeks. And so he thinks daily he should get to go. Well, even though we're surrounded by woods, we live in the middle of this big field. So we have to call other people and go on other people's land. So it's not as easy as just going out. Well, Matt had to work the next day. So who does that leave? But he's been multiple times for hours and hours, and he's never killed anything. So in my mind, when he says, hey, Mom, please, he's begging me, please, let's go hunting, I'm like, okay, it's going to be really cold. It was really cold that week. It's going to be super cold. He's got this blind he wants to set up. It's this like thing you pop up we got from Mountain View. And so I'm thinking, I'll layer up. I'll be cozy. Nap time. Sign me up. Yes, I'll go. I didn't say that, but that's honestly, truly what I was thinking in my mind. I'm going to get a nap. We're going to be out there for hours. This might be the best Thanksgiving week on the planet. Yep, I'll go. So we get up before sunrise. By the way, the only knowledge I have of deer hunting is either what I've heard him say or that article I read at midnight the night before. Okay, that's it. I got nothing. So I'm depending on my 10-year-old son to do this. So we get up. I feel like the Michelin Man. I've got on my husband's coveralls that zip all the way up. I've got about 4 layers on. I'm walking like that little child you see on memes that's laying there and they can't get out of bed. So I'm layered. I drive the truck over. We park it. We hike up into this field along the woods, and we set this blind up. And I'm like, yes, this is good. And there can't possibly be any deer, guys, seriously, because my son can't stop talking. He's so loud, there's not a quiet bone in his body. There just isn't. So, and he's got on these like snow bibs, because we had just bought him stuff for Christmas, but he didn't know it yet, to wear. So he has on snow bibs, and he's swishing the whole way. Like when you're walking, if you've ever been hunting, you're hyper aware of any noises that are going on. So I'm thinking, we no more than sit down, and I just got settled in. It takes him about 10 minutes to get this rifle out, which scares me for him to have a rifle, but he is responsible. Matt's talked a lot to him about it. And he sets it up on whatever this thing is that helps him control the movement of it. And I'm not kidding. When I just got settled, I got my gloves where they need to be, and he says, Mom, look. I'm like, oh, no. I look probably 140 yards out across the field on the other tree line, and there is this huge doe. He's like, I'm going to kill it. I'm like, wait. So we're having this conversation back and forth. I was like, wait a second. But it's a doe. Don't you want to kill a buck? At this point, he didn't care. He didn't care what it was. I think if it was a fawn, he would have probably killed it. He's like, no, Mom, I've got this. I'm killing this thing. He said, you need to close your ears. Okay, well, out of reaction, not only do I close my ears, I close my eyes. And it takes him a few seconds to build up the gumption in his mind, too, because he's not done this either. And he shoots it. This huge shot fires out. It was super loud. I'm glad he told me to close my ears, because I probably would have been tone deaf in one ear. He said, I think I got it. We have to go track it. I'm like, what? We have to go don't they just, you shoot them, they lay down, that's it, we're done? No, apparently not. We trek across this field. It's nowhere in sight. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? They really don't just lay down? No. The article said so too, but I didn't believe it. So we track up and down this fence line, don't see anything, go into the woods, long story short, and he screams, because we're both like walking in the woods. It's like, I found it. I'm like, oh my gosh, he killed a deer. I cannot believe he killed it that far. I really couldn't. And it didn't go very far. Not really, not from the fence line. And we go into this, and he's like, I go over, and immediately, I don't know what I was expecting, but I started bawling. There's this poor deer laying there, blood. He shot it in the shoulder, which is apparently good. And it's got his tongue hanging out. I cry because I'm sad for this deer, and then I'm crying also because he is so elated. He is so excited. I probably have never seen him that excited. And then he goes, do you have a rope? Rope? I was hoping for a nap. What do you mean rope? I don't have a rope. So we go and get a tarp, and then we haul this thing out. Like, it took me a few minutes, seriously, to even touch it. I was nervous. But let me tell you, by the time this finished, we were very intimate, this deer and I, because I was doing all the major hauling. Guys, I never expected, honestly, to end up in that situation. And I know that's kind of a silly reference, but we are taking places in life that we just really, honestly never thought we'd be, that we'd end up. And when I was thinking about that, do I really trust? Have I trusted in the past where God is leading my life? Because I think the answer would have been no. And when God was walking me through this, there was 3 questions that came to mind. And 3 W questions. I'm a teacher. I can't help it. Just go with it, guys. The first question was the when question. So when we're waiting on God to lead us, a lot of times we have that when. Well, when we graduate high school, when we get married, then our life's going to start. When we get out of college, when we get that nice paying job, when, you're waiting on this, whatever this is in your way, to just happen so that you can get on. And it's like milestones in your life. When you're young, you're like, oh, when I get my license, my life's going to be awesome. I'm going to be independent. Well, have you been there? Maybe you've not literally asked yourself these questions, but I think in your mind you just unconsciously do this. When is this going to happen for me? And sometimes we get stuck there because the when is not happening. When am I going to get pregnant and my husband and I are going to have a child? Another question that God brought to mind was the what's next question. And one of my good friends, Lindsay, she said this a lot lately, and that's why that stood out to me is, what's next? She just got through caring for her mother-in-law of 4 years. 4 years. And when Lou passed, they're asking themselves, what's next now? We've spent all this time. But I think that we all ask our, Randy, he just retired this year, and he's asking himself, getting into a routine, what's next, God? When you reach certain milestones, when you get out of that college, what's next? Or when you get out of high school, what's next? I finally, maybe you just got some things paid off. Well, what's next, Lord? And then the last question is the why me question. Maybe you've been in situations that weren't good. And sometimes these things happen because of our own actions. And then sometimes they happen just because that's life. And we start asking ourselves, why me? Why am I going through this? Why, maybe you have someone who has passed away in your life that's really close. Mom, dad, husband, wife, child. Why me? What if you have a sickness or disease and you find out about that and you're battling cancer or something along those lines and you're asking yourself, God, why me? Why is this happening? Do we really trust where God's leading us? And I want you to ask yourself this. We're going to pause just a second, and I want you to put yourself in this situation, and I want you to ask yourself, which of these questions, maybe it's all of them. Maybe you're going through so much that you've really hit all these things in the last year. Where are you sitting this morning? And do you trust what God's doing in your life to lead you to a place that's going to be better? So we're going to start with the story of Samuel. You can see that on the intro. And it's in chapter 1 if you're following along. So 1 Samuel chapter 1, and it'll be on the screen if you need it to be. I'm going to give you some quick background, though, before we go into verse 4. You have this man, Elkanah. Trust me, I looked that up on YouTube to pronounce his name. So Elkanah is a man, and he is of a Levite lineage. So of the 12 tribes of Israel, he's a Levite, which means that they serve in the temple for God. And typically their firstborn sons serve in the temple. Well, Elkanah has 2 wives. There's his first problem. I could have told him that up front. But this is very normal in that day and time. And he's got 2 wives, and one is Peninnah, and the other is Hannah. And their lives are so very different, you can almost completely contrast them. You have Hannah, who is his first wife, and she is barren. She doesn't have any kind of children. And then you have Peninnah, his second, who has in the Bible, and you'll read in just a second, lots of sons and daughters. So let's look at her life for just a second and see what she's dealing with. And if you'll look in verse 4 behind me, and it says, whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. So there's where it says, all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. So they go yearly, typically, to the closest tabernacle. And it's going to be in Shiloh for them. It's just north of Jerusalem at the time. And they go and they give yearly offerings so that they can cleanse themselves of any sins they might have done for the year. So it says that he gives a double portion to Hannah because he loves her. And in some sense, it doesn't say this, but he might even feel sorry for her. So they've got 2 women, one with lots of children and one without. And it says, and in some of this, I'm going to fill in their names instead of her and she because it can get confusing. It says, and her rival also provoked her. So Hannah's rival provoked her severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. So there's a rivalry here between Peninnah and Hannah. And my mind went to my 2 boys. There is definitely a rivalry. And the thing about sibling rivalries is that they know your weaknesses and they find them and they twist them and they dig their heels in, and whatever is going to hurt is exactly what they're going to do to make that other person mad. And I can see this with Peninnah and Hannah. Hannah wanted something so bad, and here this person is provoking her. Have you ever had someone do that to you? They provoke you because they know exactly where to press your buttons. And notice too that twice it says that the Lord had closed her womb. This was God's doing. But see, the thing is, Hannah didn't know that. And when we're in the midst of situations and God is leading us, we don't always see what's on the other side of that. God gives that information to us in the Bible right here. He said that the Lord closed her womb. But see, Hannah is probably thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I have children? And in this day and time, in the Old Testament, and during this phase, guys, being barren was disgraceful. They thought it was a punishment for something you had done. So when she doesn't get pregnant, then she's got lots of burden, and a lot of people are probably saying things, and then certainly Peninnah is saying things against her, that they think maybe she's done something wrong, that she can't get pregnant, she can't have children. So it was, in verse 7, year by year, that when she went up to the house of the Lord, that Peninnah provoked her. Therefore Hannah wept and did not eat. Year by year. You know, when we're dealing with something, usually year 2 or 3, it tends to go away, or something tends to give and something happen. This is year by year. This isn't a year or 2 that she's had to deal with this. This is years that this other person is provoking her, and that she is feeling this sense of, when is this going to happen to me? So, and you'll see this in verse 8 as we go, but Peninnah had 12 children. She had 10 sons and 2 daughters. So if she had them year back to back to back to back, we would say 12 years. We know that she probably didn't, and I don't know if she had any multiples, but we're going to say a minimum of 12 years that Hannah has had to listen to this and go through this. 12 years of barrenness. So looking at verse 8, then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? There he says it. He's asking her, sometimes when we're going through things, at a certain point, we expect people to get over it. Have you ever been there? Like if they're grieving something and they're upset, why? We ask ourselves, because we're on the outside looking in, why can they not just get through that? Why can't they get over that? Why are they still so upset by that here 5, 10, 15 years later? But when you're not in it, you don't know how it feels. And, here Elkanah is asking why. And I think he's being loving. He's asking her why. Why are you grieved? You have me. Am I not better than 10 other sons? And not that he wasn't good. And obviously he loved Hannah. But she was just really struggling with this. So she couldn't just get over it because she knew there was something more. So we need to be careful how we assume people feel in situations. We really do. And not be quick to just offer advice because we may not know. And God allows us sometimes to speak life into people's lives, but we better make sure that that's from Him, that it's His words and not just us being judgmental and observant. Verse 9. Sorry, I'm sniffling up here so much. So Hannah arose after they finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. So they just finished eating and drinking. They're still in this place where they give burnt offerings. And it says, now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord. He was the priest there. He's sitting, he's hanging out. And Hannah was in bitterness of soul, or what another version says is greatly distressed. So she is super upset. And she prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. And she made a vow to God and said, Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on your affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give to him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. So I want you to note some things. It never tells us that she's angry or vengeful against Peninnah, which I think would be justified almost. If someone is constantly provoking you, it'd be really hard to keep your mouth closed and to not be vengeful and to not be angry and want to do things to hurt that person. But it never tells us here that she does. Instead, she turns to God. And isn't that what we should do? Sometimes we know we should, but we just don't always make that choice. We don't take that step. But she turns to God, and she's so distressed that she makes a vow to God. I don't know if you've ever been there, if you've ever prayed, if I can get through this, God, or if you give me this, Lord, you make a vow to Him, I'll do this or I'll do that. I think we've been there, and then we often turn around, leave, and we break the promise and we move on. Hannah's been doing this for 12 years, and so she feels desperate. So the vow that she makes, this is really interesting when I was studying it. She says that she will commit him basically all the days of his life. He would be her firstborn. So as a Levite, he would go serve at the temple. Rarely in this time, though, and nowhere else in the Bible, does anyone ever make that vow for someone else, though. If they go serve in the temple, which is common for a Levite if they're very spiritual and devout family, but they would never vow for that person to spend their whole lives there. So she vows that to God. And in addition, she says, no razor shall come upon his head. Well, in that time, it was to set the child apart even more. If you didn't cut your hair and you were a priest, then that made you even like levels of being devout and serving God almost. And the more dedicated you were, the higher levels you could get to in priest, and because you can serve in the temple and not be a priest, if that makes sense. So she was making a vow on Samuel's behalf, saying, he's going to do this. So let's see what happens next. And in verse 12 it says, and it happened as she continued praying before the Lord that Eli watched her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart. So she's praying, but there's no words coming out. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, how long will you be drunk? Put away your wine from you. So he sees her, and then he thinks she's drinking. And here's another circumstance where somebody's seeing this situation from the outside and they're being judgmental. He even offers her advice. Put the wine away from you. This puts me in mind of Job's friends. When Job is going through all those things in the Bible and all his friends are giving him advice and his wife basically says, lay down and die. Just be done with it. Curse God. Well, it's easy to offer advice on the side that you're not on. But Hannah answered. So she responds to him after he accuses her of being drunk and says, "No, my Lord." So she's being very respectful here. "I'm a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman. For out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now." Then Eli realizes and he says, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked of him." And she said, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Something had changed in her. She went and laid all this out before God. She's prayed about it. She's asked for Eli's blessing. And then on top of that, she has a change. And this is how you know that something's different. Often our actions give away our trust in God. Because we say we trust him, but when it comes down to it, we worry, we have anxiety, we find that person that's our sounding board and we talk and talk and talk and talk and talk it into the ground, and then we try to fix it. That's not trust. So here, she's got a change in attitude. And let me repeat that. It says, so she went and ate. And if you've ever been really grieved, you'll do one of two things. Either you'll eat a ton, but we know that that's not the way she typically responded. She didn't eat because earlier it said that she wouldn't eat when Elkanah recognized she was upset. So she went and ate. And then it said her face was no longer sad. I almost think she even has a smile, a sense of relief. When you finally lay something down for God at an altar, in your bedroom, or wherever it is, you have this sense of, God's going to take and do something with that. Guys, this story particularly speaks to my life for lots of reasons. But I have a specific personal story with these verses. And what happened was in 2007, Matt and I got pregnant with our first child. And I lost that child on my birthday that same year. And I went through basically a depression. I really didn't know it at the time because I don't battle depression a whole lot, but looking back on it, that's exactly what it was. It was depression. And I was so upset. We'd not had anything major ever happen in our marriage up to that point. It was pretty smooth sailing for the most part. But when you do something, and then that's taken from you, and then this great fear washed over me, like, what if this is not going to happen for us? Because that's in my plan. When this happens, then our life's going to be good. I wanted children. My sister had already had a child, my twin sister. And in the midst of that, in the waiting process, we ended up being able to buy our first house and renovate it and do all kinds of things. But I can honestly tell you that especially when there's something about waiting for a baby that also makes you very aware of other people getting pregnant. Even commercials. Like I would see commercials and it was about babies, and then people would be talking about stuff related to babies, and then my twin sister got pregnant again while I'm waiting. So at one point, it was probably August-ish. I had just had all I could take. God had put lots of people in my life who had had a miscarriage, and they were able to speak things. But there's just, until you're there, you just don't know. So in August, I can remember I just had enough. At this point, and I grabbed my Bible, to sleep in the bed. So it was late at night, and I went to the bathroom, sat down, and I can remember just crying and crying and crying, and I told God, just whatever I'm supposed to read, Lord, just let me find it. So I opened up the Bible, and I can remember looking at the verses, and it's like a film of water was over my eyes. And when it cleared, I started reading, and it was these verses. And I knew at that point that God was giving me confirmation that you're going to have kids. You're going to have to wait for it. I can't describe it to you, but it was just this peace washed over me, like, just be patient. I have this. You're going to have a child. 6 months later, I find out I'm pregnant with our first son. And before I even knew I was going to have a son, I was sitting in church one day, and I don't even remember the circumstances, but God gave me his name in that message, and it was Elijah John. So before I even knew I would have a son, I had his name. And that's how good God is. You know, and if he had not even given me a child, I believe he still would have had a plan for my life. I'm glad that was in the plan, because I really wanted that. And it was in the plan for Hannah. If you read on, God gives her a son. But I want you to get this. Don't miss it, guys. God didn't want to just give her a son. He wanted to give her a Samuel. Samuel didn't just grow up and be a boy and have a job and have a wife and just do all the things that we expect our children to do. Samuel went on to fulfill the vow that his mother gave to God. He worked in the temple under Eli. He served as a priest. He became a prophet. He's the last judge of Israel. He anointed 2 kings, David and Saul. But it had to be in God's timing. God couldn't give her that son 12 to 15 years before, because all the pieces weren't together yet. David had to be born. Saul had to be put in place. Things had to be lined out in God's timing for Hannah to have Samuel, so that Samuel could do all the things that God wanted him to do. So then I ask you, church, do you trust where God's leading you? Maybe you're in a period of waiting, and it's been a long time. But have you really ever contemplated that it's because God is lining other things out, maybe in someone else's life? He wants to bless you. God's in the business of blessing. He really is. It amazes me how much God has blessed my family. But it's blessing with a purpose. He's not going to bless you just to give you good gifts, although he wants to. The nature of a father is to give children gifts and love on them. But as a parent, we know that we can't just give everything to our children. It's not good for them. I think of a cell phone. You know, Elijah he had friends in first grade when he was in first grade who had a phone. And he waited, and we didn't even give him a phone until he was in, 8th grade? 8th grade, he got a phone. But he wasn't ready for it. We know his nature. He wasn't ready for a phone and all the responsibility that comes with it. And this is what God's saying to us. That he wants to give you these answers, guys. He wants to tell you what's next and the when and the answer to the whys. But you have to be listening. You've got to do what Hannah did, and you've got to pray through the process and make some good choices, because he does want to bless you. So just imagine with me for a second what your life is going to look like if you laid all that down, and if you took the step that Hannah took, and you give that situation to God, whatever that is. Are you in a place where you're waiting? Are you in a place where you're waiting for the what's next? So I just want you to close your eyes for just a second. And PJ, if you could turn some music on for us. I want you to think about what it is that you need God to do in your life. And I know that if you look back over your life, even though our choices have been less than, and we always fall short of what God wants us to do, that He has a greater purpose and plan for us. And somehow all of our steps have led up to right now. In this seat, in this spot, at home on your couch, listening online, that you would hear this message and you would know that God has a purpose and a plan, but that it's going to be for His glory and not our own. And He is going to do abundantly and exceedingly more in this situation than you can ever possibly imagine. Won't you come, church? Do you have something you need to lay down? The altar's always open. And if you need to lay it down and get on your knees and cry it out, please come. But if you just need someone to pray, then you can raise your hand and I'll pray for you with you about it. I see those hands. God, you see these needs. Lord, there's hands going up everywhere. Lord, thank you. Thank you for what you're going to do. God, I just pray over each person and each situation and each hand that went up, because you know whatever it is that they're asking for, whatever that need is, it doesn't surprise you. That God, you already knew before they came into this church what their heart desires. And I pray that that desire lines up with your will, and that, God, you will be glorified, and that they can just cry out. That they can cry out, Lord, just on how much you have done and worked in this situation in the future. Lord, I pray that you will touch each person and family here. That they will go out and fulfill whatever plan you have for them. God, help us be in tune with what that plan is, because we mess it up on our own. We get it wrong every time. Lord, we thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your blessing. Pray that anyone who does not know you, Lord, here, and I think most do, but I can't assume that. If you don't know God and you're not aligned with His purpose, if you have not given your life over to Him completely, if you're still walking thinking, hey, the things I'm doing are good, I'm a good person, that's not enough to save you. You have to have Jesus. You have to believe in Him. I pray that you won't leave here without laying your life down before Him and asking Him to take the reins. If that's you, raise your hand and we'll walk through it together. If that's you online, God, I pray right now that they would say, God, I believe in you. I believe in you, Jesus. I'm a sinner. I've done things wrong. I've messed it up. I'm not good right now. I mess up daily. But God, I want you, and I want you to take control. It's that simple. It's not complicated. We don't have to overcomplicate coming to God. It's just a conversation saying, you have this, Lord. You're in control. I love you. Please forgive me. And that's it. You'll be saved. You are saved. If you need to rededicate because your life has been a mess, and you just say that prayer. Just talk to Him. Lord, we love you. We thank you for all things, for all that you're doing, the great work that you have for your church ahead of us, the great work that you have in individual lives. I know that you want to bless each person within the sound of my voice, each child of yours that I don't even know on the other side of the world. Thank you for the opportunity, Lord, to come into your house and hear your word. Help us to be strong like Hannah. Help us to lay things down and to just trust that you have it all together when we don't. Thank you for the people in our lives who are speaking truth and life over us. Thank you for the support of having a church who loves us, that all we have to do is say, hey, can you pray for me, and it will be done. Lord, we love you and we thank you for all things, and all you're doing, and all you will do. And I'll just pray a special prayer over those women and men and families out there who, God, who are waiting on that baby or that spouse or healing. That, God, you would be in control. We love you and we thank you for all things. And in Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen. There will be no youth tonight. I think they're still recovering from the lock-in. So, and then go out and have a great day, church.